If that terror ever goes away, I think for us it would mean a moment that we should consider retirement. Hello, my name is Kent Nagano, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Today we visit the Chiemsee in Bavaria, a region of otherworldly beauty where an Irish traveling monk founded one of the earliest Christian convents. Over the centuries, the tiny Fraueninsel, or Ladies' Island, ruled lands and villages from the Danube to southern Tyrol, survived attacks by Huns and Turks, and is to this day inhabited by a small number of Benedictine nuns. It's here that we catch up with the American conductor Kent Nagano for a meditative conversation about his life and projects, an early existential encounter with a shark, recollections of his mentor Leonard Bernstein, and the healing role of music in our lives. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation about life and music. It's a delight to welcome you onto the series.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I've been so fascinated to see all the different mentors that you've described in your life, the many great musicians with whom you've had a close association. One of the mentors I've had in my musical life said that our role as artists, our role in making art is to free ourselves. And in sharing it, we are healing ourselves and hopefully our audience. When I witnessed you conducting recently, I sensed a radiant inner joy and wonder if this duty of a musician that I'm describing is something that you identify with.
Concepts of beauty are very different from concepts of pretty. Beauty is, as we use the word normally, refers to something timeless and universal, something different than fad, mode, or fashion. Beauty can be profoundly tragic. There's beauty within that as well. There's beauty within disappointment. There's beauty within loss and tragedy. Beauty in the sense of humanity, humanism. These qualities that we explored and developed during what we today call the Age of Enlightenment, they really do represent the fundamental ideals of some sort of freedom and individuality, and yet tied together in some sort of communal consciousness. These qualities of the Age of Enlightenment that gave rise to these very, very universal ideals, to which words like beauty, joy, depth, timelessness refer. Incidences that I had, for example, as a young boy, which were at the moment horrific or tragic, I look back today and there is there is a sense of beauty about it. And so for that, I'm referring to the traumatic experience for the first time I come from California and I'm a surfer. So can you imagine the emotional trauma the first time you come face to face with a shark in the water, a great white shark? It's quite traumatic, actually. I mean, when you're just confronted with these two eyes that are looking at you, with a definite potential to be eaten. At the moment, you're not really thinking that, oh, this is a beautiful moment at all. The only thing that was important to me at that moment was just simply getting out of the water. And I realized at that moment that I swam faster than I realized was humanly possible. I just got out of the water. It's only years later, looking back at that moment and actually coming face to face in confrontation with nature and the dangers of nature, that at that perilous moment, there was a certain sense of beauty for that encounter with the power of nature that was clearly beyond my any strength that I had as a little individual. So that first confrontation was very complex in terms of it lives with me today, as you can tell from me describing it. A certain respect, a certain awe or admiration for the power of nature, and certainly the acknowledgement that there are definitely forces in the world that are much, much beyond my power as an individual. They're so powerful that they make an individual kind of insignificant. And in that sense of humility or confrontation or reckoning, there's a profound beauty to that.
With this anecdote in mind, which, as you describe, is at once harrowing and strangely meaningful, how has that impacted your musical life? I've had musical colleagues describe to me that being on stage for them, at least figuratively, feels like being eaten alive.
If that terror ever goes away, I think for us it would mean a moment that we should consider retirement. It means that somehow you feel that you're in control. And one of the critical elements of allowing something to take place that is more powerful than you can achieve simply by individual effort, the hundreds and hundreds of hours studying and practicing for a performance, of course that counts. But at the moment you walk on stage, those hundreds and hundreds of hours, thousands of hours preparation, they become irrelevant to the public. The public will judge you for what happens at that particular moment. Music in this sense is very much alive, because when you produce a musical sound, we hear it after it's been produced. Acoustically speaking, we're hearing the past. But actually we're performing in the present, but we're actually really, in fact, hearing the future. Da-da-da-dum. The public hears that. Da-da-da-dee. The public is hearing the future, and if somehow the past and the present don't correspond with the future, then something's a little bit off. So that's what makes music so unique and also so terrifying, is that everyone is sharing this existential moment. The past, the present, and the future. And the moment that we think that we can have control, that's when we lose the fear, might lose the fear or lose the terror of going on stage. Part of what makes music so special is that we have to let go, and we have to let the performance take place.
So in letting go, if we zoom out and look at our lives and we're acknowledging that which we can't control, and recognizing that there is something essential there. What about how much we can control in terms of our, I would say, artistic growth, but I'm also talking about growth as human beings? Does that just come through experience and hard work? Or are we just accepting that the most important things, perhaps, are the ones that are not in our control?
For an artist, you've never practiced enough. You've never rehearsed enough. You've never, ever studied enough. That's part of the paradox. And this lasts a lifetime. I'm conducting Eroica at the moment. How many times must one conduct the Eroica until they feel that they're perfectly in command of the piece? The moment that you feel you know everything about the Eroica, you better stop, because the piece has so many dimensions to it that they're only accessible through searching for those other perspectives that only come with, not only for the performer, for the audience. Why do we go back to Beethoven 3 again and again and again? We know the piece so well as a public. It's because we are hoping, we are expecting that we might hear other perspectives, or we might hear the piece in a completely different context, so that certain illumination comes that wasn't there before. That is part of what makes a masterpiece.
I witnessed a concert that you conducted recently in which the hall had an access point to the audience. For the people somewhat in the wings to the left, there was a glimpse to the backstage. And what was totally jaw-dropping for me, and what I witnessed as you stood there before walking out onto the stage, was you stood absolutely still in silence, not interacting with those around you, for about 5 minutes. You emerged from the wings, and then you radiated a glow. Do you feel like the creative performing process arises from a place of stillness?
There's so much energy in stillness. It's just that to the eyes, the eyes cannot see it. But just because the eyes cannot see it or the ears can't hear it, that doesn't mean that there's not an enormous amount of life and process and energy taking place. The sea, for example, it can be very calm and glassy on a certain day. But if you just go 1 meter underwater and look around, you'll see that it's bursting with energy and with movement and with life. It's just that on the surface we can't see it. So in that sense, yes. For the performers whom I know, and again, whom I respect very much, there is no moment where you start the music. The music is already active and actively taking place. Maybe that's what you saw in that moment before on stage. The music was very, very much alive and very, very active. And when we arrive at the stage, the music is already happening, so to speak. It's just simply allowing a moment so that the music is perceptible and shared. But it has been going on since before the first audible tone has been produced. That particular evening was Schumann 4th Symphony and Beethoven and the Mozart C minor concerto. If you just looked at the pianist, you would see exactly what I'm talking about, because there is a long orchestra introduction, very, very sophisticated and developed, going through certain different harmonies before the piano begins. And the piano begins very simply. I'm not saying simplistically, I'm saying very, very simply, with a single melody. And of course, between the soloist and myself, as the introduction is beginning to approach its closure, it really is a beginning of the solo piano part. And just watching the soloist play, you see that actually the music is already within him, and the fingers just allow the music to be shared.
So whether or not we feel at home in a given place where we're sharing our music, What about what we carry within ourselves from our life's experiences? Let's say you're conducting a piece with which you consulted with Bernstein or Boulez. Does that ever feel like your close mentors are by your side in a way, even if they're not here anymore?
I'm aware of some people who felt that they never really had the support or the guidance, and they felt the need to just simply do it on their own and provide knowledge purely from self-study, self-research. But most people whom I know have had the good fortune of having one or two or maybe three particularly important, influential figures who function like a lighthouse or a beacon or something. They gave a certain, they illuminated a certain direction that would be the right way to go. Of course, we ourselves have to walk that pathway, but simply to have a beacon or a light showing in the direction that we should orient ourselves is something that you never forget, ever. Sometimes, you mentioned Bernstein, Boulez, sometimes they would say things to me that at the time I didn't really fully understand. I remember the words, and I remember thinking, yes, all right. But 25 years later, sometimes the light will still come on today. So this is what they meant at the time, referring. So, yes, if you're fortunate enough to have those great and wise, influential figures, it will affect your future, which is to say, it creates an influence that lasts for a lifetime.
So I want to make sure I get the title correct. 10 Lessons of My Life, What Really Counts. Your 2021 project. I've not had a chance to read this book yet, but it sounds like you're describing already the essence of what you were going for. What was the idea behind this project and what you're trying to convey?
There are different phases of education. All of this begins when we're, actually from the moment we're born, before we can even speak, that education is taking place. And then most of us, not everybody, we go through a period of formalized institutional education. That's normally what we think of when we speak of education, is tied to somehow an institution. And what we learn there is invaluable, of course. They are the fundamental building bricks of being able to function within a chosen profession. And many people will extend that beyond initial secondary school education, extend it to university or conservatory, and then even postgraduate work. At a certain point, again, for most people, the institutionalized education phase will come to an end. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we no longer learn anymore? Well, for some people, yes, I suppose. But for most of us, it's a different kind of learning process that takes place. And from that point, we learn from those with whom we interact. We learn from those whom we respect and really look up to. We learn from mentors. We actually, if you're lucky enough to have a partner, you learn from your partner. You learn from your children, if you have children. You learn a lot from your children. So that learning process hopefully will accelerate and expand. It won't actually stop when the institutional education stops, especially if you're a performing artist, but I would say for every individual. We attach an enormous value to continued growth, continued maturity, continued depth, wisdom, to have access to those things which actually only come with time and experience. And for a musician, I would say that that's essential, because unless we're very, very much engaged with the actual generation, with our actual time, how can we possibly have the right sensitivity to create the context in which our great masters can be heard and understood? If we just simply present our great masters status quo, it's because I did that 25 years ago, seemed to work then, should work today, there's a high risk that that will become a museum. So that growth process, that expansion process, is driven by curiosity and an open mind to really make sure that we're still learning from the environment around us, which experience and interaction allows, that allows a certain sensitivity to help guarantee that these great, great pieces remain relevant today.
To single out Bernstein, is there something about his essence and humanity? For my generation, having witnessed just his recordings, and I say just his recordings because it seems like the glue that held together his particular magic concerned charisma, his love of the music, passion, which embraced everyone in his space. Is there something about his being that you would hope to pass along to the young people with whom you come into contact?
What made Leonard Bernstein so very special, and also exposed him, it also left him very, very much open to discussion. Was the fact that he defied categorization and worked very hard not to be a specialist. Today we live in a time where there are experts and specialists everywhere. If you look at cable television, 24-hour news networks, they always have a panel of specialists. But what actually does that mean? They are specialists according to whose parameters? These parameters are oftentimes undefined, and it actually can make specialists sort of dangerous if we just simply accept what they're speaking without defining actually what the parameters are from what makes them a specialist. Bernstein was obviously an extraordinary pianist. He's also, from a technical point of view, an incredibly gifted conducting technician, a maestro, which is to say. But also, he was a great communicator away from the podium in terms of the lectures that he gave, in terms of the teaching that he gave. He could somehow find a way to communicate under the most diverse situations, even when he didn't understand the language. He couldn't speak the language. He could still find a way to communicate. And I think it was a great, great effort on his part to remain open. And I think that's something that was such a great lesson to learn, that it can inspire all of us, all generations. Yes, of course, there is something to be said for narrowing and a set of knowledge parameters so that you really become an expert better than anyone else in the world from a technical point of view in a certain field. But there is also something to be said for being aware, interested, curious, and engaged with the entire world around you. And I think from that sense, it's what made Leonard Bernstein such an inspirational figure who didn't know really any national borders or boundaries. It just simply was was a universal phenomenon. Remember, just as an anecdote, while I was, during the years when I was a student, he was conducting the Brahms First Symphony in concert. And the rehearsals were not going easily, very, very frustrating for everyone. Somehow he wasn't able to really arrive at the conceptual architecture that he was searching for. And then the performance took place, and as I said, just watching Maestro Bernstein conduct, it was obvious that it was happening at the moment. There was no real obsession to try to control every single moment that was happening. It was having the eye a much higher level. And that performance was so powerful that everybody in the house at that performance, we were weeping openly. It was just emotionally and spiritually way far beyond what we could control. So we were just weeping. And the orchestra members were so caught up that they could only applaud at the end of the performance. So, 6 months later, I heard that performance was going to be, it was recorded live, it would be transmitted on the radio. So of course I circled the calendar date and really wanted to listen to this great performance on the radio. And it just was not the same. You heard all sort of the technical imperfections. It was a live performance. And when you take a lot of risks in a live performance, that kind of intensity of risk-taking, a live streaming can't capture that. It can't capture the intensity. It can't capture the radiance of charisma and the power of spontaneity.
One of my favorite anecdotes, if I recall it correctly, is that Raphael Kubalik was leading a rehearsal with the Vienna Philharmonic, and he stopped them and he says, "Why do you all equate perfection with mere accuracy? Please show me another form of perfection." Have there been times in your life where a higher perfection has resonated with you?
So the simple answer is yes. But they come at unexpected moments. It's not something that you can calculate and then experience. They sometimes come at surprising moments. So I will cite a very short story that is a story that most artists feel. So Maestro Günther Wandt, with whom I worked for many, many years, we were having a discussion about the differences between Gustav Mahler's music and Anton Bruckner's music. I had just finished a week with his orchestra, conducting a Mahler symphony, and he was there rehearsing Bruckner Ninth Symphony. So we were discussing this. And Günther Wandt was explaining the difficulty of simplicity. Again, not simplistic, but really simplicity, how difficult it was to achieve the pureness of simplicity. And was explaining that he studies hours every day how to try to achieve that in the Ninth Symphony of Bruckner, how to keep a chord progression of a level of simplicity so that the full depth and power is released through an absence of filigree, ornament, various distractions that may get in the way, excess rubato, a sudden unprinted accent, little irritating things that might get in the way. He was explaining that this sort of thing, it takes hours and hours of study and practice. It's not something that for him anyway, you could just think about and then do. And he said, usually he doesn't achieve the level that he as an artist should achieve. This is the great Günther Wandt speaking of, the renowned Bruckner interpreter telling me, yes, unfortunately, I usually don't achieve the level that I should. And it's a great motivation. I should work harder. He said, it only happens occasionally that I sometimes have a feeling that maybe a special moment has arrived. And he said, Mr. Nagano, do you know how I know that that moment has come? Just that glimpse, that little moment? And I said, no, Maestro Wandt. And he said, for a half a second, I am allowed to see what lies beyond the stars. And that sense of just being allowed the privilege of having just a moment of seeing what lies beyond the stars, that's something that I think all artists can really understand and have a certain relationship with. We work very, very hard, and it's only at those very occasional moments that we somehow have an idea that we are underneath something greater than just our individual selves.
Mr. Nagano, thank you so much for the privilege of this conversation. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.